In October 1992, the United States Congress made it illegal to manufacture or import a digital audio recorder unless the machine was built to refuse. Every unit needed a copy blocking system. Every blank disc carried a royalty paid to the record industry. Sony had announced the MiniDisc 5 weeks earlier. 4 years earlier, Sony had paid $2 billion for CBS Records, the largest record company in the world. One corporation now owned the recorder and the catalog it recorded. 22 million MiniDisc players sold across the format's life. Apple sold roughly 450 million iPods. The usual explanation is that MP3 players killed the MiniDisc and that Sony priced it too high to survive them. Both are accurate, and both point at the wrong decade. This is the story of a recorder sold by a company that had already bought a reason to stop you copying, and of the single machine, released in 2006, that finally let you take your own recordings off the disc. You remember the shutter, a hard plastic square about the size of a coaster, a metal slide across one face, and the sound the drive made when it pulled the slide open. Sony completed the CBS Records purchase on January 5, 1988. $2 billion bought Columbia, Epic, and a roster carrying Michael Jackson, Bruce Springsteen, and Billy Joel. 3 years later, the company was renamed Sony Music Entertainment. The purchase put a consumer electronics manufacturer inside the record business, and from that point, every decision Sony made about a recording device was also a decision about a catalog it owned. Sony already had a digital recorder in the market, and it was not going well. Digital audio tape had been intended as the replacement for the cassette, but technical delays held it back until 1989. By then, the dollar had fallen so far against the yen that a machine Sony had planned to sell for around $400 had to retail at $800 or $1,000 simply to break even. Sony pushed DAT into professional work and started again on something cheaper. That second attempt was the MiniDisc. Sony announced it in September 1992 and shipped it in Japan that November, then across Europe and North America in December. A magneto-optical disc sealed in a cartridge, 74 minutes of audio, rated for 1 million rewrites, with a memory buffer deep enough that the player kept going when you knocked it off a desk. The audio was compressed with Sony's own codec, ATTRAC, which cut the compact disc's 1.4 megabits per second down to 292 kilobits, a reduction of roughly 5 to 1. It also shipped with the serial copy management system. Under pressure from the music industry, Sony built a copy flag into the format, 2 bits, carried in the digital audio stream and written onto the disc itself. Then, Congress made the flag compulsory. The Audio Home Recording Act of 1992 prohibited the import, manufacture, or distribution of any digital audio recording device that did not conform to that copy system. It set a royalty on the devices and on the blank media, MiniDiscs included, paid into a fund for copyright holders. In exchange, home recording for personal use was exempted from infringement liability. The exemption and the hardware mandate arrived in the same bill. The 2 bits worked like this. One separated protected audio from unprotected, the other separated an original from a copy. Record a compact disc onto a MiniDisc down an optical cable, and the recorder wrote the result as protected and original. Take that MiniDisc to a second recorder and try to copy it digitally, and the second machine put an error on the display and stopped. Compact discs predate the system entirely and carry no flag at all. A signal arriving with no flag was therefore treated as the most restricted kind. Recording through an analog input produced the same protected marking. The digital compact cassette, Philips's competing format launched the same year, marked analog recordings unprotected. On the narrow question of what you were allowed to do with a recording you had made yourself, Sony's format was stricter than the format it was fighting. There was one way out, and it was not sold to you. Professional MiniDisc machines were exempt from the copy system entirely. Every consumer recorder carried it, the professional decks did not have to, and broadcasters bought the professional decks for exactly that reason. The catalog. Sony had paid $2 billion for was the part that never arrived. By the summer of 1996, Sony was relaunching MiniDisc in the United States for the third time. 2 years earlier, it had given away 1.1 million mini-discs to Rolling Stone subscribers, alongside a magazine campaign, one of the largest music promotion giveaways ever run. Fewer than 1 million players and recorders had sold in the country. The 1996 relaunch was a two-city test. Austin, Texas and Rochester, New York, 140 television spots, an estimated 444 radio ads, print in the local papers. Mark Viken, a senior Sony Electronics executive, described the target buyer as 18 to 34 years old, purchasing 12 or more compact discs a year on a higher-than-average income. Blank disc prices came down from $16.99 at launch to $9.99 and to $7.33 each in a 3-pack. The pre-recorded catalog, counting Sony Music, Capitol, Warner Brothers, and their sub-labels together, stood at 750 titles. It was thinnest in classical and jazz. Sony owned one of the largest record companies in the world and could not fill a rack. The hardware prices had been the visible problem from the start. At the December 1992 launch, a player cost $549 and a recorder $750. The 1996 answer was a bundle, a home deck, and a portable player and blank discs together for $599, when the deck on its own normally sold for $499. Outside America, the format was moving. Sony put worldwide unit sales at 1.3 million in 1995 and expected 3.5 million in 1996, most of them in Europe and Japan, where MiniDisc did what it had been designed to do and replaced the cassette. The other manufacturers were leaving as well. Kenwood, Sharp, JVC, Panasonic, and Aiwa were all selling mini-disc decks in Europe and Japan. And at the start of 1996, only Sony and Sanyo were still selling them in America. Underneath all of it, the economics were moving the wrong way. Sony had assumed the recordable compact disc would take about a decade to become affordable. A blank CDR cost around $12 in 1994, and by the end of the decade, it was under $1 against $2 for the cheapest 80-minute mini-disc. The cost advantage Sony had been waiting for went to the other format. So here is the explanation everybody reaches for, and here is where it stops working. The story says the MiniDisc lost to the MP3 player. The Diamond Rio arrived in 1998, and the iPod in 2001. Physical media stopped mattering, and a small, expensive disc had nowhere left to stand. Every part of that is accurate. As an explanation, it arrives about 9 years late. The decision that set the limits of what a mini-disc could do was taken in 1992 before a consumer MP3 player existed by a company that had bought a record label 4 years earlier. What followed was not a company losing a fight with Apple. It was a company spending 14 years adding restrictions to a recorder in a sequence you can put dates on. In 2000, Sony extended the format with MDLP, which used a newer version of 8-track to fit 160 minutes on an 80-minute disc, or 320 at the lowest quality. Tracks recorded in the new modes played back as silence on every player built before them. By late 2001, Sony had an answer to the computer. NetMD put a USB socket on the recorder and moved music from a hard drive onto a disc at up to 32 times real-time and 64 times on 3 models. It moved in one direction. There was no path back from the MiniDisc to the computer. The software treated a transfer as a checkout. A track could be checked out 3 times before it had to be checked back in, and checking in deleted it from the disc. Tracks written this way were marked protected, and most MiniDisc equipment would not let you delete or divide them at all. The only thing that could remove a track from your own disc was the software that had put it there. There was a quieter cost inside the same system. When the software sent a track across in the original high-quality mode, what actually landed on the disc was the lower bitrate mode padded out to fill the space. The label on the recording said one thing, and the audio was the other. That was late 2001. Apple released the iPod on the 23rd of October the same year. Sony's next answer came in 2004. HiMD reformatted the disc to 1 gigabyte, added uncompressed linear PCM recording, let the player work as a USB drive, and at last allowed uploading. The uploading did not extend to anything already recorded. Material captured in the original modes could not be moved off the disc at all. Sonic Stage tied each track's license to the hardware of the computer it had come from, so a track that had not been imported through Sonic Stage in the first place could not be sent back out through it either. Sony wrote Mac software for HiMD, and it did not work with the older formats, which meant a disc recorded on a 90s machine still needed a Windows computer to come off faster than real-time. Native MP3 playback arrived on the second generation of HiMD players in the spring of 2005. Sony's flash memory Walkman line had not supported MP3 at all until late 2004, 13 years into the format's life. In early 2005, at the Foreign Correspondents Club in Tokyo, Ken Kutaragi said something Sony executives had not said in public before. Kutaragi was president of Sony Computer Entertainment and the engineer behind the PlayStation. He told reporters that he and others inside Sony had been frustrated for years with management's reluctance to introduce products like Apple's iPod. The reason, he said, was that the company had music and film divisions worried about content rights. The divisions were finally starting to work together. It's just starting, he said. We are growing up. That was 13 years after the first MiniDisc shipped. Version 3.4 of Sonic Stage, released in February 2006, removed the upload restriction on the software side. Removing it from the software was not enough on its own. The player had to have the restriction removed as well, and exactly one model ever did. The MZ-RH1, sold in North America as the MZ-M200, was the only MiniDisc machine ever built to have it removed. It would move a recording you had made yourself onto a computer without playing the disc down a cable in real time. Nothing else Sony sold would do that. 14 years after launch, that machine existed, and it was the last one. By 2007, it was the only MiniDisc model Sony still produced. The people who had defended the format hardest were already gone. MiniDisc had kept a loyal following among musicians and audio enthusiasts, and those were precisely the people the copy system was aimed at by accident. A band recording its own rehearsal onto a consumer deck was making a protected original, the same as a chart album. Broadcasters, radio journalists, and field recordists had already moved to solid-state recorders with longer runtimes, no moving parts, and no opinion about where the audio went afterwards. Sony announced the end of MiniDisc Walkman shipments on the 7th of July 2011. The last players were sold in March 2013, though the company kept selling blank discs and repairing machines. TEAC and Tascam went on building MiniDisc decks until 2020. Kutaragi left Sony in 2007. In 2019, a programmer named Stefano Brilli compiled an open-source MiniDisc toolchain into a web browser. A NetMD recorder from 2002 can now be loaded from a modern machine over USB in a browser tab, doing the one thing the hardware was built to refuse. On the 23rd of January 2025, Sony Storage Media Solutions announced that production of recordable mini-discs would end the following month, alongside recordable Blu-ray and mini-DV. 32 years after launch, the last blank disc came off the line. One of those blanks still turns up in a drawer or a shoebox. The shutter still slides. The magneto-optical layer will still take a recording, and the recorder will still write the flag that stops the copy. The disc outlasted the catalog it was built to hold. If you ever recorded anything onto one of these, subscribe, and the next one will find you.